Hey there, fellow seekers of the unknown. Welcome back to Silent Screams, where we dive deep into the darkest corners of reality. Tonight's tale comes from our latest collection, True Creepy Horror Stories, whispers from the shadows, bone-chilling encounters with the paranormal that will make you question reality. Grab your sage, hold your crystals tight, and prepare to have your perception of reality shattered. Remember, this isn't just another ghost story, it's a real account from someone who stared into the abyss and saw something staring back. Let's begin. I never believed in the paranormal. Ghost demons, interdimensional beings, it was all just superstition and overactive imaginations as far as I was concerned. That is, until the night everything I thought I knew about reality crumbled around me. My name is Alex, and I'm a paranormal investigator. Or at least I am now. Back then, I was just a skeptic with a YouTube channel debunking so-called haunted locations and exposing fraudulent mediums. It was all fun and games, racking up views by poking holes in people's beliefs. That changed the night I decided to investigate the old Ravenwood Asylum. Ravenwood had been abandoned for decades, its crumbling Victorian architecture a stark reminder of a darker time in mental health treatment. Local legend spoke of tortured patients, unethical experiments, and restless spirits that still roam the decaying halls. Perfect fodder for my channel, I thought. I arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown grounds. The asylum loomed before me, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring down at me disapprovingly. "All right, folks," I said to my camera as I approached the building. "Tonight we're going to prove once and for all that the so-called haunting of Ravenwood is nothing more than urban legend and an old building settling." If only I had known how wrong I was. The front door creaked open with surprising ease, as if the asylum itself was inviting me in. The smell hit me first, musty air tinged with something else. Something chemical, almost metallic. I made my way through the ground floor, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and scattered papers created an eerie atmosphere, but nothing I hadn't seen in a dozen other abandoned buildings. As you can see, I narrated for my viewers, there's nothing here but decay, and a crash from upstairs cut me off mid-sentence. I froze, listening intently. Probably just some wildlife that had made its way in, I reasoned. But as I stood there, I became aware of something else. A low hum, just on the edge of hearing, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate the sound. I made my way up the creaking stairs, each step sending little puffs of dust into the air. The hum grew slightly louder as I reached the second floor, and I realized it was accompanied by something else, a whisper, too faint to make out words, but unmistakably there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty corridors. "Is anyone there?" Silence. And then, so faint I almost missed it, "Help us." A chill ran down my spine. Part of me wanted to turn and run to get as far away from this place as possible. But my curiosity and my ego got the better of me. This had to be an elaborate hoax, and I was going to expose it. I followed the sound down a long hallway lined with doors to what I assumed were former patient rooms. At the end of the hall was a heavy metal door marked staff only. The whispers seemed to be coming from behind it. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room beyond was pitch black, my flashlight beam seeming to be swallowed up by the darkness. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me with a resounding clang. Panic set in as I spun around, frantically trying to find the door handle. But where the door had been was now just solid wall. I was trapped. Okay, very funny. I shouted, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "You got me." Clever setup, but the game's over. No response. I turned back to face the room, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of glowing eyes floating in the darkness, all fixed on me. They weren't human eyes. They were too large, too bright, with pupils that seemed to swirl with otherworldly colors. I stumbled backward, my back pressing against the wall. The eyes moved closer, and I could now make out vague shapes attached to them. Tall, impossibly thin figures that seemed to shift and waver as if they weren't fully in our reality. One of the figures reached out towards me with a limb that was more tendril than arm. As it neared, I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness, as if my very soul was recoiling from its touch. What are you?" I managed to choke out. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices speaking in languages I didn't understand. But one word cut through clearly: witnesses. Suddenly, the room was plunged into blinding light. I squeezed my eyes shut, spots dancing behind my eyelids. When I opened them again, I was back in the hallway, the staff-only door closed in front of me as if nothing had happened. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, down the stairs and out of that godforsaken building. It wasn't until I was in my car, peeling out of the parking lot, that I realized I was still clutching my camera. With shaking hands, I rewound the footage, dreading what I might see. But the screen showed nothing but static from the moment I entered that room. Whatever I had encountered, it hadn't wanted to be recorded. As I drove home, my mind raced. What had I seen? What were those beings? And what did they mean by witnesses? I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those swirling, inhuman pupils staring back at me. The whispers lingered on the edge of my hearing, tantalizing me with secrets just beyond my comprehension. I threw myself into research, looking for any information about Ravenwood's history that might explain what I'd experienced. What I found only deepened the mystery. It turned out that the asylum had been more than just a place for treating mental illness. Declassified government documents hinted at secret experiments conducted there in the 1950s and 60s. Experiments involving altered states of consciousness, attempts to contact other dimensions, and subjects who reportedly developed extrasensory abilities. The deeper I dug, the stranger things became. I found references to something called Project Looking Glass, an attempt to create a device that could peer into other realities. The project was officially shut down in 1964 after a catastrophic incident that was never fully explained. But what if they had succeeded? What if, in their arrogance, they had opened a door that was never meant to be opened? My obsession grew. I started experiencing strange phenomena in my daily life, objects moving on their own, shadows darting just out of sight, and dreams so vivid they left me unsure of what was real and what wasn't. One night, about a week after my experience at Ravenwood, I woke to find my bedroom filled with a soft, pulsing light. At the foot of my bed stood one of the figures I had seen in the asylum. Up close, I could see that its body seemed to be composed of shifting geometric patterns, constantly reorganizing themselves into impossible shapes. I wanted to scream, to run, but I found myself paralyzed. The being raised a limb, pointing directly at me. When it spoke, its voice resonated in my mind rather than my ears. "You have seen. You cannot unsee. You are a witness now." A witness to what? I managed to ask. To the truth. To the thinness of the veil between worlds. To the beings that exist in the spaces between realities. As it spoke, the walls of my room seemed to dissolve, revealing glimpses of other places, other times. I saw vast alien landscapes, civilizations rising and falling in the blink of an eye, and creatures so bizarre my mind struggled to comprehend them. "Why me?" I whispered. Why show me all this? The being's form flickered, as if it was having trouble maintaining its presence in our reality. Because you sought the truth, and now you must bear witness to it. The door has been opened. They are coming. Who's coming? What door? But the figure was already fading, the visions of other worlds disappearing with it. As my room returned to normal, its final words echoed in my mind. Prepare yourself. The convergence approaches. I sat there in the darkness, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. Was I going mad? Had the entity been real, or just a vivid hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? But deep down I knew. What I had seen, what I had been shown, was real. And it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, my life became a waking nightmare. The boundary between our world and whatever lay beyond seemed to be growing thinner by the day. I saw things that shouldn't exist, shadowy figures darting through crowds, everyday objects briefly morphing into alien geometries, and once, a tear in the very fabric of reality hovering in the middle of a busy street, ignored by everyone but me. I tried to warn people, to tell them what was coming, but no one believed me. My YouTube channel, once dedicated to debunking the paranormal, became a platform for me to share what I had learned. But my viewers thought it was all an elaborate hoax, a way to drum up more views. If only they knew the truth. It was a month after my encounter at Ravenwood that I met Sarah. She approached me after one of my increasingly erratic live streams, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and recognition. "You've seen them too, haven't you?" she asked without preamble. I nodded, relief washing over me. Finally, someone who understood. Sarah, it turned out, had her own encounter with the beings I now thought of as the witnesses. She had been hiking in the mountains when she stumbled upon what she described as a tear in the air, a rippling distortion through which she saw a vast city of impossible architecture. I only glimpsed it for a moment, she told me, but it was enough. Ever since then, I've been seeing things. Impossible things. And I can't shake the feeling that something is coming. Something big. Together, Sarah and I began to piece together the fragments of information we had. We scoured occult texts, interviewed people who claimed to have had similar experiences, and even reached out to former employees of Ravenwood Asylum. Slowly, a terrifying picture began to emerge. The experiments conducted at Ravenwood hadn't just been about contacting other dimensions. They had been an attempt to break down the barriers between realities. And to some degree, they had succeeded. But in doing so, they had drawn the attention of beings never meant to interact with our world. Beings that existed in the spaces between realities, feeding off the energy of collapsing possibilities. And now those beings were preparing for what they called the convergence, a cataclysmic event that would fully merge our reality with theirs. We had to stop it. But how do you fight against entities that barely obey the laws of our universe? Our search for answers led us back to where it all began, Ravenwood Asylum. We knew it was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but we had to know the truth. We had to find a way to close the door that had been opened all those years ago. As we approached the asylum under the cover of darkness, the air itself seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. The building loomed before us, somehow more menacing than I remembered. The vortex's pull was overwhelming, its swirling energies promising infinite knowledge and power. For a moment, I felt my resolve weaken. What if the witnesses were right? What if this convergence was the next step in human evolution? But then I felt Sarah's hand in mine, anchoring me to our reality. Her touch reminded me of everything we stood to lose, our world, our humanity, our very essence. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. We won't be your heralds. We choose our world, imperfect as it is. The witnesses' forms flickered, their alien features contorting in what I could only interpret as anger. The vortex pulsed violently, and I felt a searing pain in my mind as the beings pushed against my mental defenses. You cannot stop what has already begun. Their voices thundered in my head. The convergence is inevitable. As if to emphasize their point, the walls of the asylum began to dissolve, revealing glimpses of other realities bleeding into our own. I saw impossible landscapes, creatures that defied description, and versions of myself living out countless different lives. Sarah tugged on my arm, pulling me towards the exit. "We need to get out of here," she shouted over the growing maelstrom of colliding realities. We ran, dodging falling debris and patches of warp space where the laws of physics no longer seemed to apply. Behind us, I could hear the witnesses giving chase, their otherworldly forms gliding effortlessly through the chaos. As we burst out of the asylum's front doors, I was shocked to see that the anomaly wasn't confined to the building. The entire town seemed to be affected. Street lamps bent at impossible angles, their light taking on an eerie, pulsing quality. People stood frozen in the streets, their forms flickering between different versions of themselves. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, panic evident in her voice. I looked around frantically, trying to find something, anything that might help us. That's when I spotted it, an old church at the end of the street, its spire reaching defiantly towards the roiling sky. "There," I pointed. "Maybe we can find help, or at least sanctuary." We sprinted towards the church, the very ground beneath our feet shifting and changing with each step. I chanced to glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The witnesses were gaining on us, their forms growing larger, more monstrous as they shed any pretense of humanity. We reached the church doors just as a tendril of otherworldly energy lashed out, narrowly missing us. I yanked the heavy wooden doors open, and we tumbled inside. The interior of the church was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Candles flickered softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, and at the altar stood a figure in robes, their back to us. "Please," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "We need help. Something's happening. The world is ending." The figure turned, and I felt my blood run cold. Where a face should have been was a swirling vortex of energy, similar to the one we'd seen in the asylum, but somehow older. More primordial. "I know," the figure said, its voice resonating not in my ears but in my very soul. "I have been waiting for you." Sarah gripped my hand tighter. What are you?" The figure glided towards us, its robes rippling with patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "I am what was before, what is now, and what will be," it said. "I am the guardian, the one tasked with maintaining the balance between realities." A thunderous crash from outside made us all turn. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the witnesses approaching, their forms now so large they blotted out the sky. "The witnesses," the guardian said, a note of sadness in its otherworldly voice. "My children once, now corrupted by their desire to merge all realities into one. Can you stop them?" I asked, hope rising in my chest. The guardian turned its vortex face towards me. "Not alone. The convergence has progressed too far. But with your help, perhaps." Before we could respond, the church doors burst open. The witnesses poured in, their bodies twisting and reshaping as they struggled to fit through the human-sized entrance. Enough, their voices boomed, shaking the very foundations of the church. "The time of separation is over. All will be one." The guardian moved to stand between us and the witnesses. "You have forgotten your purpose, it said. Reality is meant to be infinite, not singular. As the two forces clashed, the air itself seemed to tear apart. I saw glimpses of other churches, other guardians, other versions of Sarah and myself caught in the same moment across countless realities. "We have to do something," Sarah shouted over the din of colliding universes. But what could we do in the face of such cosmic forces? We were just two humans, insignificant specks in the grand scheme of the multiverse. And yet, we were here. We had been chosen, for whatever reason, to witness this moment. Perhaps that meant we had a role to play. Acting on instinct, I reached out and grabbed the Guardian's robe with one hand, keeping my other hand firmly clasped with Sarah's. The moment I made contact, I felt a surge of energy course through me. Judging by Sarah's gasp, she felt it too. Suddenly, I could see everything. Every possible reality, every choice ever made or unmade, every life lived and unlived. The sheer weight of infinite possibility threatened to crush my mind. But through it all, I felt Sarah's presence, tethered to my own reality. And I understood what we needed to do. "We are the witnesses," I said, my voice echoing with power I didn't know I possessed. "We stand at the crossroads of all realities. And we choose balance." Sarah squeezed my hand, adding her voice to mine. "We are the bridge between worlds, the guardians of the in-between. We reject both perfect unity and complete separation." Our words seemed to ripple outward, affecting not just our reality but all realities. I saw the witnesses falter, their forms becoming less solid. The maelstrom of the convergence began to calm, realities settling back into their proper places. But it wasn't over. I could feel the strain on my mind, on my very soul, as we held the multiverse in balance. How long could we keep this up? That's when I heard it, voices, countless voices from across realities, adding their strength to ours. Every version of ourselves that had faced this moment was joining together, creating a network of witnesses spanning the entire multiverse. The witnesses howled in fury and desperation, but their power was waning. The Guardian's form grew brighter, bolstered by our combined will. "It is done," the Guardian said, its voice filled with relief and gratitude. "The balance is restored." Slowly, reality began to stabilize. The tears in space-time mended themselves, leaving only faint scars that throbbed like half-remembered dreams. The witnesses, depleted and defeated, faded away to whatever realm they had originally come from. As the last echoes of the convergence faded, I felt the cosmic awareness slip away. I was once again just Alex, standing in a normal church with Sarah by my side. The Guardian was gone, but I could still feel its presence, watching from just beyond the veil of our reality. Sarah and I stumbled out of the church, exhausted beyond measure. The town was back to normal, or at least what passed for normal now. People went about their business, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to having their reality erased. But there were changes, subtle things that only Sarah and I seemed to notice. Shadows that moved a little too fluidly, reflections that didn't quite match, and every now and then, a glimpse of something impossible out of the corner of your eye. "It's not over, is it?" Sarah asked as we walked down the quiet street. I shook my head. "I don't think it ever will be. We've seen beyond the veil now. We can't unsee it. So what do we do?" I thought about the network of witnesses I had felt, that vast web of counterparts across realities all working to maintain the balance. "We keep watching," I said. "We stay vigilant. And if the time comes again, we'll be ready." As if in response to my words, I felt a faint pulse of energy. For just a moment, I saw a shimmer in the air, a glimpse of other realities layered over our own. a reminder of the tenuousness of our existence and the responsibility we now carried. Sarah saw it too. She took my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we now shared. Together, we walked into an uncertain future, forever changed by our encounter with the impossible. In the days and weeks that followed, life took on a surreal quality. On the surface, everything seemed normal. People went to work, children played in parks, and the world kept spinning. But for Sarah and I, there was no going back to our old lives. We saw things others didn't or couldn't. Ripples in reality where the veil grew thin. Shadowy figures that vanished when looked at directly. And sometimes in our dreams, echoes of the vast multiversal network we had briefly been a part of. We tried to resume our normal lives, but how could we? The weight of what we had experienced, what we now knew, was too great. Our old jobs, our old pursuits, they all seemed trivial in the face of the cosmic truths we had glimpsed. So we adapted. We became watchmen of sorts, guardians of the spaces between realities. We traveled to places where the boundary between worlds was thinnest, old houses with dark histories, ancient sites steeped in myth, crossroads where multiple ley lines intersected. Sometimes we found nothing but whispers and shadows. Other times, we faced horrors that defied description, entities attempting to breach the veil between worlds. And each time we stood our ground, using the faint echo of the power we had wielded during the convergence to push back the encroaching chaos. We weren't alone in our mission. As we traveled, we encountered others who had been touched by the otherworldly, people who had seen things they couldn't explain, who had brushed against the edges of realities beyond our own. Some were driven mad by their experiences. Others, like us, had chosen to face the unknown head-on. We formed a loose network, sharing information and coming to each other's aid when the threats grew too large for one or two people to handle. We called ourselves the Witnesses in memory of our first encounter with the beings from beyond. But with each victory, with each averted crisis, a nagging doubt grew in the back of my mind. Were we really making a difference? Or were we just delaying the inevitable? The Witnesses, the original ones, the entities that had sought to merge all realities, were still out there. I could feel them sometimes pressing against the edges of our reality, searching for weak points. The convergence had been stopped, but for how long? It was a year to the day after our experience at Ravenwood Asylum that things came to a head. Sarah and I were investigating reports of strange occurrences in a small coastal town, people going missing, only to return days later with no memory of where they'd been but bearing strange geometric scars. We tracked the source of the disturbances to an old lighthouse on a rocky outcropping. As we approached, I felt a familiar hum in the air, a vibration that seemed to resonate with something deep inside me. "Alex," Sarah said, her voice tight with tension. "Look." I followed her gaze and felt my breath catch in my throat. The lighthouse was wrong. Its proportions shifted as I watched, the spiral of its staircase visible through suddenly transparent walls. At its top, instead of a light, was a swirling vortex of energy all too similar to the one we had seen a year ago.